everybody, thank you for watching Leaf by Leaf. I hope you're all having a wonderful Bloomsday. 2022 is of course a very special Bloomsday because it is the centenary of Ulysses, the book that established Bloomsday. But today I'm not going to be talking about Joyce or his work, at least not directly. I'm going to be talking about a book that talks about his work, or more specifically, James Joyce's cultural influence and just how far-reaching it really is. I'm talking about David Collard's Multiple Joyce, 100 short essays about James Joyce's cultural legacy. If, like me, you haven't heard of David Collard before, he is a London-based writer, essayist, literary critic. He wrote a review for Emer McBride's A Girl is a Half-Formed Thing for the Times Literary Supplement, and his blurb shows up on the back cover. Emer McBride is a writer of remarkable power and originality. And in fact, in his James Joyce book that I'm talking about today, he completely compelled me to go ahead and get this and start reading it. Obviously, 100 essays is quite a lot to ask of a reader, especially one who may not know of David Collard. And despite that adjective short in there, the 100 still seems a little daunting. Some of them, yes, do fit onto a single page. Some of them, especially later on in the book, which was a shrewd decision on part of editor and writer, they do get a little bit longer, but none of them more than about 5 or 6 pages. The average length of all of these essays is probably 2 to 3 pages. Now, what makes it work is that not only is David Collard very knowledgeable of the publishing industry and his literary history, and of course James Joyce, but he's also very intellectually solid. But the best quality is that he's just simply charming. Right from the first page, I found myself enjoying listening to Collard's voice. And right from the title, Multiple Joyce, this is a play on multiple choice. And in fact, the last essay in the whole book is designed as a 24-question multiple choice quiz that gives a quote from someone about James Joyce and then 4 options for you to choose from. There's an answer key, of course, afterward. And this is crafted such that I had a lot of fun deciding who of these people, because the choices are quite obviously from the mind of someone who just knows their literature. Almost every single one of the titles is something that's properly Joycean, like Call of the Wild, with Wilde spelled as Oscar Wilde's surname. Write Like a Kardashian, which is a play on dance like an Egyptian, I'm presuming. His art belongs to Dada, which I'm presuming is a play on the Cole Porter song, Her Heart Belongs to Daddy, but here we're talking about the Dadaist movement. But beyond titles, the structure, the craft, the design of each piece makes it a joy to read, but also a lasting pleasure in the mind, because you can tell these aren't just blog entries that are then cleaned up and formatted for a book. Collard made splendid use of his time in quarantine by combing out a hoard, a treasure trove of Joyceana. But what's so enjoyable is the way that he takes this wealth of trivia and anecdotes and fun facts and curiosities and some bizarre stuff too, and then starts to make connections between everything. He is what I would consider a literary sleuth. He's intensely curious, inquisitive, and resourceful. Here's a small excerpt to get a sense of his personality. I know far more about Mr. Bloom, that is Mr. Leopold Bloom, who doesn't even exist, than I do about my closest friends and members of my family. And he is indeed a Joyce aficionado. Mr. Bloom's peregrinations around Dublin after leaving his home take the form of an erratic question mark. And he gives credit where credit is due. For that one, he says, I think Frank Delaney, who was the first to point this out. Ulysses was indeed written in something close to a crayon, as Joyce's publisher, Sylvia Beach, recalled. Without the wake, we would have no Luke Skywalker, no bleeping androids, no Obi-Wan Kenobi, no Death Star, and no Darth Vader. And Collard will explain why. Joyce apparently pronounced both Ulysses and Ulysses as Olysses. When asked why he disliked dogs, he replied, because they have no souls. Joyce was very frightened of thunder. When asked by author Power why he was afraid yet his children were not, Joyce replied with contempt, "Ah, they have no religion." It is well known that Svevo, Italo Svevo, a Jew and an atheist, was the likely model for Leopold Bloom. Less well known is the fact that Joyce took Svevo's wife Livia's name for the Wake's Anna Livia Plurabelle. Joyce wrote to Svevo in February 1924 to tell him just that. So far from different seemingly bombastic claims, Collard always backs up what he can sense will be novel anecdotes or novel assertions with explanation and proof. But besides just a horde of trivia and interesting facts, Collard gives us a bunch of great quotables. Collard even gives us some potential oversights in the work of Joyce. In A Portrait of the Artist as a Young Man, Father Arnault preaches a sermon during a 3-day spiritual retreat. And in the midst of that, he quotes a scripture that he says comes from the Old Testament book of Ecclesiastes 7:40. But as Collard says, oh no it doesn't. Chapter 7 of Ecclesiastes has only 29 verses. It doesn't go up to 40. Father Arnault's text is actually taken from Ecclesiasticus 7:40. So is this error Joyce's or Father Arnault's? Without a moment's hesitation, I can tell you I have no idea. So when he does point things out and he leaves them for our enjoyment, he always has a grace note of wit. Throughout the midst of savoring all of these Joyce morsels, I learned about the strange proliferation of Joyce death masks that are out there. I learned why I may need to retire my long-used Gabler edition and order the cheapo Wordsworth Classics edition. I decided that, yes, it is a good idea to keep Finnegan's Wake at my bedside and not ever look at it as something that I need to read from cover to cover, at least not sequentially as I would a normal book. I have a list of at least 30 scholarly books on Joyce and his work that I didn't know about before. And I have a list of incredibly useful websites that I'm going to include in the description. All of them came out of this book. Midway through the book, in a very personal confession, David Collard opens up and lets us in on a major struggle and ultimate liberation that took place in his life, and how A Portrait of the Artist as a Young Man was so crucial during that time. It's a wise choice because the way that these essays are designed is it captures your attention at the beginning and stimulates us with all of these interesting insights, but all the way Collard's charm is bringing us more and more into his living room to where we're virtually sitting at his feet like young children and just listening to him talk. His voice and his style are infectious, such that when we reach that middle, we're now sympathizing with him, and some of us may even be empathizing with him. In the second part of the collection, we start to get a more direct and trenchant voice from Collard. He starts to bring in some serious issues and debates in the art world. He takes on people who have been dismissive of Joyce and his work. He boldly and proudly champions independent publishing, as do I. He makes it clear why you can't assert that nobody really reads Joyce. He basically joins into the larger literary conversation and the hot debates that are going on right now, especially in the proper use of language. He takes on several authors, including Paulo Coelho, with unblinking force. One clarification of Collard's that I especially liked is that it is nonsense to say that poetry is for everyone. It's nonsense, of course, because poetry, like Matisse and Mozart and Miles Davis, like ragtime, rap, and reggae, like ballet, baseball, and Baba Ganoush, like Ulysses and Finnegan's Wake, and every other novel ever written, is not for everyone and should never be for everyone. Poetry is for anyone. I won't belabor the point any longer. This is a wonderful book. Anybody who's even remotely interested in Joyce should own this book. Anyone who likes essays where the sleuth behind them has combed all of these different repositories to make interesting observations and curious connections will love this book. I have learned that if I'm ever on some kind of game show and I'm faced with a question that has anything to do with James Joyce, my lifeline is without question going to be David Collard. So go pick it up. Multiple Joyce from Sagging Meniscus Press. And happy Bloomsday 2022.